Welcome everyone for this ARNIC seminar. We have a special guest, which is our own colleague, Marlon Twyman, assistant professor at Annenberg, formerly got his PhD at Northwestern with a number of people that we are friends and colleagues at Northwestern. And he's a new NSF-funded line of research, has a lot of overlap with ARNIC agenda on online inequality, and we invited Marlon to present his work. So thank you, Marlon, for accepting our invitation. I wonder, we usually do a round of introduction, but I wonder if you know everyone, or I mean, I assume you know most people because they are your colleagues, but is there anyone that needs introduction? Perhaps we can do that quickly. I see, do you know Erezi? She's our a postdoc.
Yeah, I was gonna say, maybe we could just really quickly do the postdoc and student introduction, and then I can move into the top.
Great, great. So why don't we do that? So we don't need our faculty to introduce themselves because I'm sure Marlon knows who we are. But why don't you go ahead, Erezi, and then we'll go through some of the other people that Marlon doesn't know.
Sure. Hi, Marlon. I'm Erezi Obo, a postdoc working with Francois and Hernan on digital divide issues. Before joining USC, I was working as a faculty at NCCU. And before that, I got my PhD from Carnegie Mellon.
All right, thank you for showing up.
Okay, maybe Juan and then Alex.
Sure, I'm Juan Ortiz Freuler. I'm a first-year PhD student. Hernan is my main advisor with Francois. And I'm interested in geopolitics and been working on some internet access issues as well.
Okay, nice to meet you, Juan. Welcome.
And Alex, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Alejandro, or Alex for short. Actually Marlon's mentor this year. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm a first-year PhD student, and I like to research datafication, infrastructures, and networks.
Great, and Marlon, I don't know which ones you know.
I was gonna say, could we do just practic pretty quickly? And I think that would be everybody.
Yeah, cool. Hi, my name is Pratik. I'm a first-year PhD student as well. Kind of broadly interested in studying technology and inequality. Recently, kind of interested in kind of racialized surveillance and technology.
Okay. All right. Great. Great. So thanks for the new intro or the intros from the people who I haven't met yet. Thanks again, Alex, for reintroducing yourself. Now, I agreed to talk with this particular group because I think that there's some interesting kind of like synergies. I won't say I overlap too heavily with what you all do, but I do think my research program in some ways is actually complementary of the work you all are doing in ARNIC, as well as I view it as like adjacent. So some of my training before landed me in learning about the digital divide, thinking about broadband infrastructure and issues that manifest when people don't have equitable access. But what I'm doing these days is I think about how are people differentiated after they've succeeded in being online, or after they've once they've reached over that initial hurdle of just access, what does their experience look like in online spaces, specifically in user-generated content communities. And so, as I'm sure a lot of us would agree, there's a lot of content being produced on many platforms that we use for information sharing, entertainment, the social media applications that have been pivotal for maintaining social relationships during the pandemic, and even things such as, say, like Wikipedia, that are huge information repositories. Now, of course, all of these are contingent upon the producers or the contributors being able to not only provide information, but then have some kind of engagement to further encourage future participation, okay? And what happens with like any of these user-generated content communities if they're successful, they end up having vast quantities of information, right? They have maybe millions of users, thousands of pieces of content being generated on a consistent basis. But a problem actually arises as user-generated content increases. And the first one is consumers of the platform or users of the platform, they have to then decide what they're going to allocate their attention to, deciding what relevant content is or how they can assess the quality of content is a non-trivial cognitive task. Additionally, the communities themselves, so the administrators or the platform designers, they have to think about how they can encourage content production, but also help people find content. So we see a lot of algorithms, a lot of news feed-like interactions to help community members find relevant content that they may be interested in. And as a result, these end up being environments where producers are effectively competing to attract attention to their contributions over another person. So even if they're not having a competitive culture, saying like, oh, I want to be the top person or I want to have the most views, given that the consumers only spend a fixed amount of time in any given platform, they are effectively competing among all the other content producers. So quick examples just to illustrate how much content I'm talking about. If you're somebody who peruses the website Reddit, they have like a number of different smaller communities called subreddits. And in the news community, we have on a random day, I picked this randomly, you'll have over 100 posts covering global news events. And in total, you can have thousands of comments. I enjoy quickly skimming headlines on Reddit, but I don't want to spend my whole day reading comments, right? So there is something to be said about how does a platform help guide a user's consumption patterns. The second one, I think is actually something we can all relate to. You may be looking for a specific type of food. And so when I put in sushi in my zip code, believe it or not, I end up having over 200 results. Now, again, if I just want to find something close to me, that seems good enough. I'm not interested in reading, at least 240 reviews, let alone the hundreds of reviews that each individual restaurant might have. Yet all of this content does have a purpose. And one of the main purposes is that nowadays globally, and I'm using some data, or I'm using a headline about some data that leaked from Twitch, there's a lot of economic importance placed on being able to attract attention online. And so what the Twitch streaming service data leak showed is that for all of the earnings that these content producers are having by having live streams of their events, their game playing, a majority of that rather is going to the top 1% of earners. So people who have large audiences are getting a lion's share of the total earnings. And what's interesting about this is that only 5% of all Twitch streamers made over $1,000 last year in 2020, or in 2020, I think the leak came in 2021. And what this means is you have content producers who are looking for audiences for their work. They might be trying to create livelihoods or at least have side revenue streams, but this actually ends up being a very inequitable space for earning livable wages, so to speak. And one justification or one thing that would explain the inequality is the idea of the social dynamics that emerge in online fields. And what I mean by the social dynamics specifically, I focus on this unequal accumulation of differentiation or distinction. And really what happens in online communities, you have a user population that just experiences variance and participation, as well as their acquisition of quote unquote symbolic capital. And symbolic capital, quite frankly, just means capital that represents something for a given community. So having a verified symbol on a social media platform is one example, as well as hitting some threshold for number of followers, or if you're a LinkedIn user, having 500 plus connections. And so as you have these like differences in participation and production, effectively you can have status differences that end up helping explain how some people end up getting more viewership or attracting audiences to their work. People become more reputable. And as a result of like these clear differentiations that happen among producers, people then begin to engage in status-seeking behaviors, okay? They try to determine what's being rewarded by the community, and they try to meet those demands to attract attention to their work. And so what I think about as like my core phenomenon of interest for this work is this idea that communities, on one hand, they need to keep the content new, they need to keep the content fresh to try to make sure they get repeat users, daily active users. However, for the people providing the content or creating the content, they actually end up having a lot of issues that arise from being in this competitive market where they're trying to attract attention. And so quite simply, I'm interested in investigating how are producers trying to navigate this environment. And what I do is I actually focus on a large data science community called Kaggle. And what's cool about Kaggle, well, there are many things actually, but what's cool about Kaggle for this audience that I'm talking with today is that they actually are a global community. There's a number of users from Europe and Asia, as well as North America, and they all come together to learn about data science and share resources. And specifically, they share both software code or algorithms for how you can conduct certain types of analyses, as well as sharing data sets for people to practice or do analysis on. Personally, I found a number of data sets that I use for course instruction, as well as what I use for my own training and learning during graduate school. And so one of the main features, as well as this concept of a data science competition, where it's an opportunity for people to actually build their professional portfolios in data science. And they were actually acquired by Google, so they're now underneath the Google umbrella, and they continue to grow. So when they were acquired, they had on the order of, I believe, like 600,000 members in their community. Now they have over 7 million and continuing to grow as they've tried to become a resource for learners of data science. And now in this context, let me really quickly show you all what I mean when I say status, as well as the other idea that I brought forth in my title around topic diversity. So this is like a screenshot of a piece of user-generated content where someone will have like their analysis documented. And the first thing when you were to like open this page, you would see the community is giving some kind of positive feedback. So you can see the number of views that the content's received, as well as the number of votes. And so for my research, this ends up being the main dependent variable that I care about. Effectively, how well received is the contribution being made. Now, the next thing that I'm interested in is this idea of topic diversity. So one of the things that I haven't gotten into in depth yet, but one of the things that a user of any of these online communities will notice, there's a lot of content and it needs to be organized in some way, right? And so being able to create associations for your content underneath themes or topics, that potentially could be a strategy that's used to help get an audience, right? To help attract a broad audience. And then lastly, it's this idea of the status of the producer. So Kaggle actually makes it relatively straightforward. If you're a community member, you will be able to recognize that there's effectively a status system. There are people who are basically new users who do not yet have status. There are people who have started to progress towards, if this image is not too small, this is someone who's actually leveling up. They haven't completely reached the highest level yet, but they do have some amount of record of work, a record of productivity. Now, one other thing I would like to note is with another example of user-generated content, this creator decided to have a very focused signal of the topic. So they're not trying to attract a broad audience through the number of associations they're making to topics. They're just saying that this piece of content is about one topic, in this case, data visualization, okay? Now, you all might be saying, well, what's the important consideration here? How is this relevant to the kinds of topics we care about at ARNIC? Well, what's really fascinating is that Kaggle has turned into one of the more valuable resources in the data science employment market. So a few years ago, organizations or companies would specifically look for employees or consultants through the Kaggle competitions. So they would try to find people who performed well, had highly rated solutions, and then they would try to recruit them to help them solve their business problems. And now today, businesses of many different sizes actually use Kaggle participation as an indicator of competence. So when I was on a job posting board, I think ZipRecruiter, I found effectively a small business, a startup here in the Los Angeles area. And one of the things they asked for is a portfolio of work. Since data science is still pretty new, there aren't necessarily too many formalized education programs. The portfolio is important, and Kaggle is one of the spaces where people can demonstrate that they have experience. And this also holds for large companies as well. So again, here in LA, going to a publicly traded company, Snap, they actually list the participation in Kaggle contests before they even mention academic publications in their job posting. So that's the level of respect that the Kaggle contributions have for the field of data science. Now, thank you all for bearing with me slogging through the broader kind of a big picture, but I do at least want to get into the meat of the academic work that I've done. And conceptually speaking, what this line of research is about is this idea of how people can receive feedback in online communities and what that could look like. Now, for my specific context, this is really an environment, a community that focuses on peer awards or peer recognition. And so all I mean, and this is an example from a similar website of a Stack Exchange, the idea of the upvote has become one of the more ubiquitous and helpful indicators of how well received a piece of content is. And so here, in this example I have, this is a person who's looking for a public data set, like, okay, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to do something with large data. Can someone help me understand what resources are available? Apparently, hundreds of other people also find this question to be of value, so they upvote it, right? And then the responses will come in, and one of them coincidentally ended up being Kaggle. And again, the upvote helps people find the most relevant and helpful information in a given community. And now for my perception of user-generated content, there's really two types of features that I think are helpful for understanding what kind of work ultimately attracts the most attention. The first one is information about the underlying topic or the quality. Oh man, if we were in person, I would have opened it up for class participation. I was going to say, you know, by a show of hands, how many people are interested in reading something about a topic that they don't have any interest in? Nobody does that, right? And so before clicking a link or before investing a large amount of time, typically the first thing people think about is, okay, is this something I care about? Is this something I'm interested in? And so that is one thing that can draw attention. Typically, what kind of topics is a producer talking about, or what are they trying to communicate? And then the second one is information about the producer themselves. So typically their reputation. Oh, wow, I'm really excited to read work from this person because I liked their other stuff before. Or, I wonder who this person is, right? There's variance how we think about the creators of work. And what both of these features do, they effectively are signals. They are ways that people can gain some type of information about the content without investing large amounts of time. And so conceptually, this is a paper that ends up being about signaling, and specifically signaling in the digital arena in an online community. And we're a communication school. And so signaling, I think, is a lot of fun to begin to learn about, because it is one of the more powerful ways that we can enact or practice strategic communication. And what it specifically does is it actually reduces information asymmetry while competing for capital. And so one of the easiest examples I have is the use of a resume or CV for as part of the application process. So obviously we all have a lot of experiences. We have years of life experience, but then we use a relatively short document that attempts to summarize and also highlight some of the most important experiences we have. And that helps serve as a signal, because effectively a reader may know nothing about us, but after reading the resume, they have some piece of information. Now, in online communities, signals are helpful because they can provide information about what specific topics are relevant or of interest. They can also give an indicator of quality depending on the types of interactions that are available. But one thing to note, there are costs associated with signaling. And typically these costs could be related to the amount of time invested in producing a signal, but then there are also costs with respect to how well aligned is the signal with the underlying work that it's supposed to represent, or the information that it's supposed to represent. And then if the audience does not necessarily perceive that the signal is a good one or an accurate one, there is potential for a penalty or some kind of negative response. And so really quickly, just to summarize, if you're someone who's thinking about producing a signal, you'll probably have some information first, and then you won't assume people will be able to consume everything you have available. And so you'll create a signal, some kind of indicator saying like, hey, I'm a professor here at Annenberg. I'm giving a talk on online inequality. That's a signal. And then a receiver will observe that signal, and then they'll provide some feedback. And so just by you all joining today, I think that that's like a form of feedback that you all are interested in this topic, right? Now, going back to the two features though that I care about, firstly is this idea of how can you signal topic diversity using content tags. And I have an example of that coming up soon, but really quickly, just to define topic diversity, I view topic diversity in this work as using multiple topics or associating a piece of content with multiple topics as a relatively costless signal. So in an online community, it doesn't take a lot of effort to just add a couple of keywords to your work. And what this does is relatively low effort action. It helps organize content into visible categories. It helps producers in uncrowded topical areas attract attention. And uncrowded, maybe it's just a space that not a lot of people are thinking about. But if you just have a topic, we can then begin to make reference of it. We can think about what this piece of work is. But on the downside, just really based on the audience demands or audience interest, people may be less interested in the offering. And so a quick example from Kaggle, one of their most popular competitions ever was a $1 million competition to help Zillow refine their Zestimate algorithm. And if you go to Kaggle today, you'll find that there are 3 keywords associated with this competition: real estate, housing, and then custom metric. Now, as a member of the Kaggle community, what you would learn is, if you don't know what Zillow is as a company, for example, you could start thinking, okay, this has something to do with the housing market. This is about the real estate industry, and custom metric, they're going to be looking for something non-standard. And so these topics actually help the audience or the viewers or the consumers begin to make sense of a piece of content without actually deeply engaging with it, okay? And this leads to my first hypothesis, which is, well, that's the long way to put it. You all can read it, but the quick summary is basically, well, topic diversity should be good up to a point, but too much topic diversity can end up reducing the positive reception. And so as a person who's a researcher, it's helpful to think of it in terms of perhaps 2 to 3 areas are easy to talk about, but if you continue to add more content, more tags rather to represent your content, it could become confusing. It can become less clear what the work is about. Now, the second feature relates directly to this idea of status systems in online communities. And really quickly, I'm just going to explain the role that they play. So firstly, a lot of online communities give status to others based on the contributions, as well as demonstrating commitment to other people in the community, specifically being able to comment on other people's work, getting visibility by being someone who's helpful, providing information to others. And as people become more active than others, status actually helps differentiate people into effectively hierarchies where there's just benefits. Some online communities give greater access or greater functionality to people who have been there longer, make more contributions. And so there ends up being a clear differentiation between people who are contributing a lot and those that don't contribute as much. Now, comparing acquiring status to signaling topic diversity, I consider gaining status to be a much more costly signal of content quality, because a consumer should be able to see that you've actually invested some amount of time into the community, you've done a good amount of work, you've had positively received work, right? And so someone consuming your content should be able to see that, okay, this is a person of some kind of quality. Obviously, they're doing something that's positively favored in the community. And let me just give a couple of quick examples of online status systems. The first is Stack Exchange, where they have this reputation score, they have a dashboard keeping track of your numbers of questions, the numbers of answers you provide, and then how many people have seen the content you provided. And Kaggle, what they've decided to do is they've decided to actually give labels to effectively categorize different users. And the people who just joined, they're considered to be novices. And after you've done a little bit of engagement, so you've read other people's work, you voted on people's work, you've contributed to competitions and discussion boards, they then let you be a contributor. But then in order to climb to expert, master, and grandmaster, you actually need to produce positively received work that's upvoted over some threshold, and you need to place highly in some competition. And then the last thing I want to say about status systems in online communities, they also are able to use effectively virtual currencies. So Reddit has an interesting model where as people are upvoted and downvoted, that can be turned into effectively a little digital currency that you can award to other people. You can give people gifts for quality contributions. And so my second hypothesis considering online status is more straightforward, I would say, where I just expect high status producers to receive more feedback on their content than low status producers. With stated more simply, reputable producers should be gaining more upvotes for their work. They've already done work before. They understand what works for the community, what's well received from the community. Now, the last thing I want to say conceptually before really quickly telling you all more about my data and then going through the results. So over the next like 12 to 13 minutes is this idea of the core periphery structure of online communities that I view as being one of the more helpful ways to understand what inequality looks like online. So what happens in online communities is that over the past 2 decades, as more and more people have moved into online spaces to do work, we've observed repeatedly that we end up having something called like the 1-9-90 principle, where you have 1% of the population that is really focused on adding content, and then you'll have, you know, roughly 9 that they rarely actually produce their own unique contributions, but they're active in engaging with other people's work. And so these are the people who are the voters and the commenters. But then we have 90% who are effectively readers, so pure consumers, okay? And so in this structure that just happens to manifest repeatedly in online communities, well, I'm interested in better thinking about the ways in which, how does this social structure emerge? What is it about the design of an online community that makes it very natural for a stark minority of users to end up doing a vast majority of the production, right? And specifically, we call these people the core, the high status contributors of an online community. They contribute more, they're more invested, they care more. Meanwhile, you have the periphery, the low status users who are more passive. You don't really notice them, and they're less productive. They tend to just be readers. So the pure kind of, I guess, social process that I think is possible and that I have some evidence for in this data is that social mobility should be a thing in online communities, right? Should not be as many barriers of entry, or not of entry, of barriers to progression. The rules are well defined. There's clear indicators of progress. So low status producers, people who start off at the periphery, over time, given the right feedback, they should be able to join that core. And so one way that I argue that that can happen is that a low status producer could decide to differentiate themselves from their peer group, from other low status people, by signaling conformance to what high status members are doing. So mimicking the behavior of the core should have a positive impact on being able to join the core. And so in my setting, if signaling topic diversity attracts positive feedback, and that positive feedback is a way that you can join the core, more productive part of the community, then this signal should be able to help low status producers attract attention to their work. And so my third hypothesis is that signaling topic diversity of your content, that should have a more positive impact or more positive effect on feedback for low status producers than high status. So stated more simply, content by low status producers should experience larger gains from topic diversity, okay? Now, let me just share really quickly some information about the Kaggle context, specifically what my unit of analysis is, and then I'll say some things about my sample size and close out really quickly with like results as well as some related projects. But we're right on target to have about, I would say, 10 minutes for questions. So what my unit of analysis is something called a computational notebook. And in recent years, computational notebooks have become the chosen really communication medium or genre for data scientists and really people who are interfacing with software code in order to produce content, as well as like help other people learn from it or share their work. And so let me give you all an example of what I mean. This is another screen grab of what I'm calling a computational notebook in Kaggle. And what it is actually a combination of things. Firstly, it is a narrative of the analysis that was done. So there's this natural language, it's a report. But in addition to the reporting aspect, it also embeds the software code that was created to produce the analysis. And so a consumer not only sees like your final answer, they see the work. And this is very, very helpful for the scientific enterprise, helping in the reproduction of research. And what's cool about Kaggle, you can also include links to the underlying data that was used, as well as how many times you had to run the software. And then lastly, it has social aspects as well. So people can directly comment or vote on your computational notebook. So they can ask questions to you, they can give you positive feedback, affirmations. And so as the first comment says, oh, hey, this is great. This means everything to me. Thank you for creating this, okay? Now, the way I was able to get access to this data is through their publicly available, they call it the meta Kaggle, but it's basically their publicly available data set about how their community is growing, what their community members are doing. So they don't include any information about the the content or the text that's contained within these, they call them kernels, but within the computational notebook, but you can still get the number of views, the number of votes, as well as information about the creators. And I would like to note that this particular data set also demonstrates how users can engage with content provided on the platform. You can upvote basically anything on Kaggle, you can upvote it, you can comment on it, you can actually attach your own software code to any other piece of user-generated content as well. And then also, of course, you can include keyword tags. So this one, I would argue one of their more helpful data sets they have available. It's updated every 24 hours. It's huge. It only has one tag. It only has one topic that they associate. So they say that this is something for computer science. And so my measures that I care about in this computational notebook space, my dependent variable that I'll share with you all today is really just the number of votes, the number of endorsements that a piece of work receives. And I have two independent variables. I do have a host of control variables that I can share if anyone's interested, but the two independent variables I care about, topic diversity, which is just the number of unique tags applied to a notebook, and then producer status, which is the title that the content producer has that they've been awarded from the community. And so here are the measures. Topic diversity is based on the Kaggle tagging system. And I wanted to make this note here. Some online communities let users just use any language or labels that they want. And so it's a crowdsourced, user-generated tagging system, so to speak. But Kaggle actually provides the tags to the user. So it's a closed, fixed hierarchy. And at the time of data analysis, there were 642 tags that were organized into 22 different I'm calling them families, but topical domains, and there's a layer. So let me just give some examples. So they have a natural and physical science family, and that was the one that had the largest hierarchy, where you could get very, very specific going through biology. Okay, well, what about biology? All right, well, let's specifically look at health sciences, human health or public health issues, the healthcare system, and then dentistry. And then comparing that to a relatively more shallow family with like machine learning, where it only has some details about how machine learning is done. So monitoring the model, and then something else around, I think, cross-validation. So this is where the tags actually came from. It's a pool of 642 tags. And then the producer status, each user or each contributor to Kaggle, they end up having a status level. This example is just someone who will be known as a grand master because they've reached the highest possible level in one of 4 dimensions. So the competitions dimension is a purely performance-based measure where you need to place highly in a Kaggle competition, but the other 3 are based on the voting behavior. So how well received are your contributions in the data sets realm, the notebooks realm, and then the discussion forums. Okay, and so for the data, the producer status, it takes the highest status level you've achieved, either based on your performance or your popularity in the community. And so for my research design, once again, to summarize, my level of analysis is the computational notebook, and I'm specifically looking at the amount of votes that were received. My sample are notebooks that were created after the producer reached their current status level, so their highest status level in the community. And I control for different aspects of both the notebook and producer levels. I'm using some modeling techniques that allow me to cluster on producers to try to account for the fact that one producer may produce multiple different notebooks. And then lastly, because I'm doing the count of votes, I'm using something called a negative binomial regression model. And so really quickly, coming in on the home stretch, my data covers a little more than 4 years of content production. 34,000 producers have created 94,000 notebooks. 10% of these notebooks were tagged, which is interesting for 2 reasons. Firstly, 10% of content being tagged or labeled, that tends to be the norm for large online communities. So this is along the lines of what we expect to see as online community researchers. But what I think is valuable to know, tagged notebooks actually account for much more attention than untagged notebooks comparatively. So 10% of the population of notebooks in the sample account for a third of all views, and then 43% of all votes. And so there's something here about the tagged notebooks that's worth investigating. And then just something about sample sizes again. Gaining status is non-trivial in Kaggle. So there are 26,000 producers who are at the lowest level, but then there are progressively fewer. And I actually include employees of Kaggle in my sample just to see if there's any difference in having that kind of status marker where you're an employee of the online community and they actually have a different incentive system at play where their status does not come from votes. And so I use this as a way to just better understand community attention dynamics as a whole. And what we see here, again, just descriptively for the average number, the mean number of notebooks produced per person, the more status you have, the more content you have shared with the community, the more notebooks you have produced, with the employees being more active. And then for the average or mean number of tags used, so taking the novice as the comparison case, we see significantly more tags being used by contributors, experts, and masters. But then statistically, there's no difference between the number of tags that a novice uses compared to a grandmaster. And then employees use significantly fewer tags when they are producing their notebooks. And so the results, like I said, we're doing great on time. To just get us reoriented around my hypotheses. So hypothesis 1, I think that too much topic diversity will end up diminishing the positive impact that showing multiple tags could have. The second hypothesis is that content by more reputable producers, high status producers, will have more upvotes, so it'll be more positively received. And then the last hypothesis is that content by low status producers will have larger gains from using topic diversity strategy or signaling as a strategy. And so I will just show you all the plots. So hypothesis 1 is supported, where as content producers add more tags to their work, they should be gaining more votes. However, once they start to add 4 to 5, which were the maximum observed levels of topics or numbers of tags in the data set, that's when the positive benefit began to decrease. So the first hypothesis is supported. Having labels for your work helps you get more positive feedback up to a point, at which point it doesn't help anymore and can actually start to diminish the reception of your work. The second hypothesis was also supported, where the status level of the producer ends up influencing the number of positive receptions as well. And so the novice, which is the one farthest on the left, it had the lowest number of estimated votes. And then as the status increases, the expected number of votes increase as well. But interestingly, employees, they don't have any difference from the lower status users. And so when I did look into this more deeply, just qualitatively, apparently employees are producing a lot of notebooks, some of which are just to demonstrate functionality for the platform. Others are actually well received, but there's a much higher variance of reception of the work created by employees. And then the last hypothesis, it was partially supported and it's mixed. And all the visualization shows is that there's no consistent pattern for how higher status content producers, whether or not them using topic diversity is a positive thing or not. And so for the grandmaster, there was a significantly negative relationship with having more tags or having more topics associated with their work. Whereas for the master producer, so the second most high status members of the community. There was a much more curvilinear effect where having moderate amounts of topic diversity was a good thing, but having high amounts didn't make much of a difference compared to not tagging your work at all or not labeling your work at all. However, comparing that to, again, the expert or the contributor, both of those did have curvilinear relationships, with the experts having a much more negative response, whereas the employees were negative as well. And so novices, they had what appears to be a more positive gain, but really the main takeaway from hypothesis 3 is that depending on how high up you are in the status hierarchy, there's some variance into whether or not using topic diversity will help your work gain more favorable feedback. And so just some high level takeaways to summarize what you all saw on the plots. So positive feedback in online communities is essential for helping the community promote content growth, encouraging people to pursue rewards, incentivizing people to produce fresh content, using relatively costless signaling of topic diversity, really easy to just associate a topic to your notebook that increases feedback, but more diversity diminishes returns, shows diminishing returns. And then we have 2 features of the content, topic diversity and then status. As the hypothesis 3 showed, these are not a cumulative increase. This is not a purely additive effect. There are some nonlinear dynamics at play. And then lastly, what we do see though is that using topic diversity as a signal for your content, it actually helps the lower status producers more than it does high status producers. And so the fun thing here is that for all of us, if we want to think about applying this to all of our online identities, if you already have a large follower base on social media, maybe you don't need to use a lot of hashtags. Maybe focusing your contributions will be more meaningful than someone who's just simply trying to grow their audience. And then let me just share really quickly with it's literally going to be like 2 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, just some other work that I'm doing in the Kaggle space that is currently ongoing. The first is diving more deeply into how core periphery network structures are affecting productivity in collaborative ecosystems, and specifically looking at the competitions, the team competitions that Kaggle hosts, looking at how productive or how well performing these teams are, depending on whether or not they have members who do belong to that core. So our teams that have people that are regularly active, who are producing a lot of content, do they perform better, or are there no major differences depending on whether or not you have people who just don't engage much with Kaggle? So what does it mean for team performance? Another one, and these are all collaborations with USC people, by the way. Another one, looking at the trade-offs that come when you build more inclusive incentive systems. So you all care a lot about inequality as I do. And I think it's a natural thing to think about, okay, well, let's expand what this community can be. Let's think differently about who this community is for. And what Kaggle did back in 2016, they said, okay, we're a place for competitions, but let's also think about being a place for learners. Let's think about being a place where people can come and just share information. And so what they did was they incentivized these more social kind of popularity metrics. They said, hey, we want people to share their work. We don't want people to hide really interesting solutions to problems. We want to incentivize people for sharing that. We want to incentivize activity and discussions, being helpful. We want to incentivize giving people resources to do work through data sets. But what happened was the people who had gained a lot of status through the competitions ecosystem, they actually experienced status loss. Now they have many more dimensions that they may have been ignoring, that they're falling short of, and now they need to reorient what it means to be members of this community. Qualitatively, looking at some of the discussion forums around that time, some people said, okay, well, it's time for me to leave the community. It appears that this isn't the place that I thought it was. And so there's some interesting repercussions of creating more inclusive incentive systems. And then the last one, since data science is still relatively new, and because I have data from both Kaggle and Stack Exchange, thinking about what categories or topics are persisting as data science is continuing to evolve and mature. And so just understanding, well, what is data science about? Is it about machine learning and software programming? Well, yeah, sure. But as I'm sure a lot of us are becoming more familiar with in the Annenberg community, data science is also starting to consider things like ethics, deployment in society, societal implications, right? And so these are like 3 projects that I have directly related to my work. And then just lastly, in summary, as you all may have been aware before, but I've hopefully have convinced you even more, user-generated content communities actually are pretty valuable for our modern society. We're using them a lot. They're prominent. We're using them for helping people learn how to be data scientists. We're helping people get data science jobs through building portfolios. We're also seeing user-generated content communities, particularly in open source through GitHub, helping the world progress in the types of technological innovations that are being created. I'm going to be, completely candid. I spend a lot of time on Twitch and Reddit just for entertainment purposes. So these are platforms that are providing, some, escape from the serious nature of life, but then also user-generated content communities are huge and vast repositories for knowledge and information, okay? And so this is what I've been working on as part of my NSF funded research. I've also been spending time taking advantage of my USC Provost Fellowship, some teaching releases to do this work as well. And so, thanks for inviting me. Sorry I ran a little bit longer than I wanted, but we still do have time for a few questions, and I can hang around a little bit.
Thank you, Marlon. Yeah, we do have some time, and I don't know if you can stay a little bit longer.
Absolutely. Yes, I can.
But we have Francois and we have Ke, so maybe I'll start with Francois.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Marlon. This was really terrific, really interesting to see this work. One question I have actually dovetails on your last couple slides, which is most of your analysis thinks of Kaggle as a closed system. It's looking at reputation, topic diversity within that system. But in fact, as you know, there are other places where software developer, data scientist exchange information. There is GitHub, there is Stack Exchange, there is Colab, etc. And one question I have is to what extent there is permeability across these places. So does my reputation and topic diversity on GitHub leaks onto my Kaggle diversity? And are you looking at anything that goes across these different systems? And that, just as a subsidiary question here, I think that's also important as a concern for us, the I in ARNIC, the international dimension. So if you look at the demographics, Kaggle is predominantly US. GitHub is a lot more international. I haven't checked Stack Exchange, but there's a huge diversity in, or a huge difference in the diversity of these platforms. And I'm wondering whether you're interested in looking at what role that plays and how people can carry their reputation from one to the other, or how that interplays.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. And yes, I've been thinking of these things. And I will make a note, or I'll make this note, and it's interesting. So you are correct. Kaggle is US based, or mostly their user population is US based. But interestingly, their second largest population is India, and there are still substantial percentages from non-US countries. But so, okay, you said a lot there and it's all great, but let me start. So status spillovers are not something that I'm measuring, because the way that most directly works, not just in Kaggle, but for all of these technically oriented online communities, they all allow you to link your other profiles. And so if you go to any producers or users page, they'll have the option of adding their personal website as well as their GitHub page, as well as their Twitter and everything. And so one thing that could be done that I'm not currently doing, just because of Kaggle's actual terms of service, they ask that you don't scrape information off of users' profiles. But there is something to be said about just understanding the level of productivity across different platforms. And to your point, if we're seeing someone who's not very active in Kaggle, but then it turns out that they actually have a large reputation in GitHub, they've got a number of projects there, that's not something that I can account for now. but I'm in regular discussions with the Kaggle team. And something that is interesting along these lines is that they're constantly revisiting their progression system. And some piece of feedback that they've received is, we don't like the undermining of new users being called novices. I have a career, I have a robust, history of work. Just because I'm new to this community doesn't mean that I'm a novice to this field. So that is an issue. But then to your point about going back to the demographics, some work that I am doing in partnership with them is trying to just better understand where new users are coming from. So since a lot of their more recent platform changes have been centered around like students and learners, trying to understand, is that coming through courses like faculty that are creating or using their infrastructure to create assignments? Is that coming from people who are in a more unstructured learning environment? And so this does not address your concerns directly, Francois, but these are definitely things that I'm thinking of. And to, again, lastly, just moving this outside Kaggle, right? So when I started this work, a good justification for only Kaggle was that it was the premier space, but that's rapidly changing. It's becoming a much less concentrated space for people to engage in data science projects. And so still an open question, Francois, but I'm definitely open to cross-platform work. The idea of static spillovers is an important one. I don't think I can do it with the current data set, but there could be another platform that has more, that's more accommodating of trying to create these inner platform links, I would say. So I love the comment though. Other questions? And like I said, I can hang around past noon as well. Oh, can you lie about the Kaggle location? So I'm not sure, to be honest with you, Ernan, but what I will say is on the pages, it appears that you can type in your location, but I do know for a fact on the back end for Kaggle, like specific, not metrics, but for the way they run their business, they do monitor IP addresses because they allow for cloud compute and storage. And so they do have very rigorous kinds of like understandings of like who specifically geographically is using their platform, but I don't have access to that data.
Right. And another question, Marlon, I had is, can you see who voted for the notebook?
Yes. So that is actually a project that I will be getting started on in probably about a month or so. So I don't want to put my RA on the spot, but I am working with an RA who we have plans to look at basically the voting network to understand where does status come from. Is this a relatively few number of actors who are doing a lot of this endorsement? Is it much more distributed? Are we also looking for the experience levels of voters? And then any kind of, we can't get much demographic data, but using some gender APIs, we have a messy measure to see whether or not there's at least some kind of signal there to look into. But yeah, I am very interested in who's doing the voting or not. Oh, we have Juan as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Juan.
Thank you, Marlon, for the great presentation and very clear how you were building up the argument. I was wondering if you could say more about social mobility and when it fails. In line with what Francois was discussing, I mean, as a user of some of these platforms, I see, for example, in gaming platforms, if you go in and there's a lot of inequality, it's not fun. And so you drop out because you can't really play the game. And I've also seen it in marketplaces. So sometimes you go in and it seems like some users aren't really users, but like a group of users. So they use one profile, but they deliver through many, which probably, creates a lot of concentration. And so it kind of defeats the purpose. And it's, in Argentina, Uber has become that, where, the driver isn't really the owner of the car, but there's someone who owns many cars. And so we see all of this consolidation happening. And so people no longer enter, right? Because they're not getting the promises. And so I was wondering if there was something that you could say about do people walk out when there isn't that social mobility?
Yeah, I mean, I love that point. So let me tackle the other one first. So where you're talking about basically consolidation, multiple accounts, and that kind of thing. So what Kaggle does on the back end, they have a number of different verification steps, and they're constantly removing duplicate accounts. Originally, when they came up with that procedure, it was because they didn't want people in the competition landscape basically just multiplying their possibilities of winning under the same username. But that's worked out well for them to get rid of like duplicate accounts or people who are trying to manipulate in some way. So like self-voting is the main thing that they wanted to combat against a few years ago. Now, for your more substantive question about what happens when social mobility fails, I think in online communities like this, that depends on the motivation of the user. And I mean, you're right, exits most definitely, but what Kaggle does to help reduce the level of exiting, there's still a lot you can do in the platform without social mobility. You can still access like the Google Cloud compute infrastructure, which Kaggle offers it for free, but that's actually a paid service outside of Kaggle. And so there are incentives to keep people there, even if you don't want to participate in the status domain. But other things about that is, oh yeah, so because the motivation is so varied, some people, just to be honest, like myself, I'm only a Kaggle member so that I can download interesting data sets. I don't want status there. Other people are there just to, you know, passively learn. And so there's so many different things to accomplish in that particular platform. I would say when social mobility fails, I think we're looking at a much smaller proportion of the population that will be experiencing negative impacts from that failure. And so the reason I'm looking at the status loss idea is because these were people who spent substantial time, investments, they have rewards, and then all of a sudden they were told that that experience is now equivalent to being a popular forum producer or a forum contributor or a popular notebook producer, like someone who can create tutorials. And so those kinds of like value dimensions I think are interesting. What happens when social mobility fails? I am looking at exits. So I have some data that's not public from Kaggle, but we're looking at trying to better understand for new users who or what types of people are more likely to not complete the early tutorial programs. And so we're collaborating with them currently on that. And we found that the people most likely to exit tend to be people who are who have other jobs outside of data science, where they're viewing this as how much work can I get done within a fixed time window, compared to people who just have much more time bandwidth. And so, great question. Don't have one answer because it's such a diverse set of concerns, but definitely work there to be done. And I'm still working on this stuff. This is where I'm not just Kaggle, but like these topics is where I'm putting a lot of my intellectual energy these days. And so I don't have answers today, but invite me back in the fall and we'll see what updates I have for this group.
Thank you, Marlon. I think that's both an invitation and a
oh yeah, I invited myself right now. Like,
yeah,
no,
well, self-invitation. We love those. So yes, hopefully we'll have you back soon with more of this ongoing research, and of course some of the students are also involved, so that's great to have some of the students that were also involved be part of this discussion.
So really quick. I see a question about the Kaggle algorithm, about does that affect? So
oh yeah, go ahead.
Great question. Algorithms matter less in Kaggle than one would think, and the reason why is because they implemented their search algorithm before they did the progression changes and everything. So it's not taking into account like popularity of the user, but it does take into account just the overall voting and recency. And so if you type in a keyword or something related to a keyword, they do have that kind of text-based matching, but then they just try to balance popularity with newness as well, given how much technology changes in data science. So there is some effect, but in conversations with the actual Kaggle team, one, they said that that's not something that I would be able to account for through the analysis, but also that they're not using their search algorithms to drive traffic in the way that other platforms do. So just wanted to throw that in. And in fact, they said that it's a much more straightforward search algorithm than the modern state-of-the-art ones. So.
Can I make just one quick comment?
Please.
So Marlon, so great talk. Just want to add one quick thing. Just I actually found a very similar finding in my own research on online review platform, although it's a little different community. What I found out was that higher level reviewers, when they are focusing on too many topics, their credibility score goes down. Whereas lower level reviewers, when they write more topics, their credibility score goes up. So I found it interesting that even though we are looking at different online community of different nature, we see very similar pattern. And also in my case, the reason was that people who are reading online reviews had different attribution of motivations of review writers. So they thought that when higher level status reviewers are writing on too many topics, they thought that the motivation was driven by some economic incentives, other than purely helping consumers with information and things like that. So I think just understanding the mechanisms of why people have different credibility scores, or in your case, number of votes, depending on the status and then topic diversity, might be another interesting topic to investigate.
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. And more evidence that we should talk. All right.
Yeah. Awesome.